Welcome to my YouTube channel. Today's video, we shall be looking at the embryology of the cleavage and the blastocyst formation. Today's video is all about those embryonic events that took place immediately after fertilization, you get, before implantation. So we shall be looking on the cleavage, the morula, and blastocyst formation. Get. So if you are coming across my channel at the first time, enable to subscribe, because in this channel we detail every video that we film. Endeavor to subscribe because it will help you in medical board exam. Now let's proceed. The first thing first is the introduction. The introduction. What is cleavage? What is cleavage? What is cleavage? A cleavage is a repeated mitotic cell division that occurs in a zygote, thereby resulting to division of smaller numbers of a cell. It is a repeated mitotic division of a zygote into a smaller unit. That is the concept of the cleavage. I repeat, a cleavage is a series of repeated mitotic division of a zygote into a smaller unit. Otherwise, the cleavage is a specialized cell division that occurs in a zygote, which increases the number of a cell without the mass of a cell. You have to understand that the type of mitotic cell division that occurs in a fertilized oocyte, which is the zygote, is quite different from other mitotic division that occurs in other somatic cells. Now, the mitotic division that occurs in other somatic cells, it usually led to an increase in number of a cell and also a mass of a cell. But in the case of the zygote, which is the cleavage, a specialized mitotic cell division which occurs in a zygote, there is always an increase in number of a cell, but not in the mass of a cell. That is to say, the mitotic division that occurs in other somatic cell, there is always an increase in number of a cell and in the mass of a cell. But in the case of a zygote, there is no increase in the mass of a cell. There is only increase in the number of a cell. That is the only difference between cleavage and other mitotic cell division that occurs in other somatic cells. That is a clear differentiation between cleavage and other mitotic cell division that occurs in other somatic cells. Now, as we have talked about the cleavage, that is a specialized cell division that increases the number of a cell without the mass of a cell, or it is a series of repeated mitotic cell division in a zygote, you get, which does reduces the number of a cell into a smaller unit. That is the concept of the cleavage. You have to understand that this cleavage occurs immediately after fertilization. Yes, it occurs immediately after fertilization. And once there is cleavage, there is always a rapid increase in a number of a cell. Cleavage led to a rapid increase in the number of a cell, and that cell is called the blastomeres. Now watch. This is a zygote, which is early embryo. Early embryo. The zygote is early embryo. It is that undergoes cleavage, you get. Now, recall that The zygote is guided or protected with jealousy by a thick glycoprotein coat called the zona pellucida. The zona pellucida is a thick glycoprotein coat that guides the fertilized oocyte, which is the zygote. So this is the zona pellucida. The zona pellucida. Yeah, it guides the fertilized what? Embryo, which is the zygote, as it is undergoing what? Cleavage. Now you have to understand again that as the cleavage is going on, there is always a what? A decrease in the mass of, like there is always a decrease in each of the cell, because those cells that undergoes cleavage, which is the blastomeres, as the cleavage is going on from different cell stages, they are being what? There is always a decrease in their what? In their size. The blastomeres, which is that cell that undergoes cleavage, decreases in number, in decreases in size, I mean to say, in each of the successive cleavage division. You get? Every blastomeres that undergoes cleavage, there is always a what? A decrease in size. You get? In each of the successive cleavage division. Now watch. You have to understand that this cleavage occurs in the uterine what? Uterine tube. Yeah, because immediately the oocyte is formed, that is the fertilized oocyte, which is called what? The zygote or the early embryo, is formed, or it is being formed in the ampulla region of the uterine tube, because recall that fertilization occurs in the ampulla, which is the largest part of the what? Uterine tube. It occurs in the ampulla. Now once it occurs in the ampulla, the fertilized oocyte, which is the zygote or the early embryo, began to journey, travel from the ampulla to the uterine cavity, where implantation will take place. You get? Now from the ampulla to the what? Uterine cavity, there are a series of embryonic events that took place, which is cleavage, morula, and blastocyte formation. Do you get? Now, in the case of cleavage to occur, cleavage occurs immediately after what? Fertilization. Because after fertilization, the fertilized oocyte will begin to journey, move from the ampulla, going to the what? Uterine cavity for implantation to take place. So it occurs between the movement of the what? The fertilized oocyte from the ampulla to the uterine cavity. That is the concept of all this whole thing about the cleavage. Now, what will happen is that the zygote will divide. It will divide to produce two cell stage. You get? It will produce what? Two cell stage. Recall that this is the blastome, right? The cell are the blastome. This is the blastome. Two of them are blastomas. Do you get? Now, as this have taken place, the zygote will divide to form two cell stage. You get? To form two cells. We call it the two cell stage of the what? Of the cleavage. So this is the two cell stage. The two cell stage. Recall that as the cleavage is going on, the zona pellucida still protect the fertilized oocyte with jealousy. It has to protect it until implantation is ready, then it disappears. Now, this remains our what? The zona pellucida. The zona pellucida. Now, we have formed our two cell stage from the zygote, because the zygote has to divide to form two cell stage. Now, what will happen is that the larger cell will divide, not the smaller one. The larger cell here, which is this, will divide to form three cell stage. Watch. The larger cell will divide larger cell will divide. Yeah, it's an important clarification. The larger cell will do what? Will divide to form what? 3-cell stage. So this is your 3-cell stage. 3-cell stage of the embryo. Now, in this case, the fertilized oocyte is still guided by the zona pellucida also. Zona pellucida is still guided by the what? By the zona pellucida. These cells are still blastomeres because it is the blastomeres of the fertilized oocyte that undergoes what? Cleavage division. You get? Because they constitute the zygote, which is the early embryo. So once the 3-cell stage are being formed by the successive division of the 2-cell stage, you get? Now the small one will divide to form what? To form 4-cell stage. This is a 4-cell stage. The 4-cell stage, this remains our zona pellucida. They are still what? Blastomeres. They are still blastomeres. Now, recall that it is the small cell that divides to form the 4-cell stage. Small cell will divide. The small cell will do what? Will divide to form the what? The 4-cell stage. Now, the 4-cell stage will also divide to form the 8-cell stage. Get? The 8-cell stage will divide to form the 16-cell stage. Get? This is the 16-cell stage. Of embryo. Now, watch. Here requires a critical understanding. Now, watch. This is the 16-cell stage of the what? Of the embryo, which is how everything is going. The early embryo, which is the zygote, right? Now, this 16-cell stage, it resembles a mulberry fruit. It resembles a what? It resembles a mulberry fruit. It resembles a mulberry fruit. You get? And that is why it is termed what? Morula. You get? The 16-cell stage of embryo is called the morula. So here is the morula. This is the morula. The 16-cell stage. Although it is also being guarded by the zona pellucida. The zona pellucida will still guard it with jealousy. Here is the zona pellucida. The zona pellucida still protect it. Now, in the morula, the blastomeres, recall that these cells still remain the blastomeres. They are the blastomeres. They still remain the blastomeres. Is an important what? Notification that you should know. They are still the what? The blastomeres. Now, in the morula, which is the 16-cell stage of the embryo, in the morula, the blastomeres becomes very, very small. They become so small. And due to their smallness nature, they lack cytoplasm to survive. You get? Because they are small, they are very, very tiny. You get? You don't compare the size of the blastomeres in the 2-cell stage to the size of the blastomeres in the 16-cell stage, which is the morula. You get? Now, that is why they lack what? Cytoplasm to survive. because they are very little. That is why they lack what? Cytoplasm to survive. And recall that the morula is a 16 cell stage of the what? Of the embryo. You get? It is a 16 what? Cell stage of the embryo. You get? Now, that is how it does what? It does. I mean, it works, they say. So the next stage now we shall be looking on to is the step for the formation of the blastocyte. Yeah, the step for the what? Formation of the blastocyte. Now watch here. The embryo is still guided by the zona pellucida. Still guided by the zona pellucida. Yeah. Now, the cells of the embryo are being arranged into two groups. You get? The cells of the embryo are being arranged into two groups. The first group is the one that is found at the center of the morula. You get? Which is the one that is found at the center of the morula, called the anal cell mass, otherwise known as the embryoblast. You get? And the one that is found outside the morula or the periphery of the morula, called the trophoblast, which is the outer cell mass. Now watch. The group of the cell that is found inside the morula is called the inner cell mass, which is the embryoblast. So these are the embryoblast cell. Which is the inner cell mass. And the group of the cell that is found outside the morula or the periphery of the morula is called the outer cell mass, which is the trophoblast. So here are the trophoblasts. Or the outer cell mass. So that is how the two cell mass are formed. You get? The cell that is found at the center of the morula is called the inner cell mass, which is the embryoblast, while the one that is found outside the morula is called the outer cell mass, which is otherwise called the what? The trophoblast. That is how it does what? It works. Now, the next stage is also, we are still continuing to form the blastocyte. You get? These are embryonic events that continues. Now, as the embryo journeys along the what? Along the uterine tube. As it journeys along the uterine tube, the endometrial fluid that is being secreted by the endometrium of the uterine tube penetrates the zona pellucida of the embryo to fill the intercellular space of the morula. You get? It is the presence of the endometrial fluid that was secreted by the endometrium of the what? Uterine tube that fills the intercellular space of the morula. Now, gradually, the intercellular space of the morula become confluent and enlarged, thereby forming a single large cavity called the what? The blastocell. This is the blastocell. This is the blastocell. It is a single large cavity that was formed by the presence of the endometrial fluid that was secreted or produced by the what? Endometrium of the uterine tube. You get? At that point, the embryo is called the what? The blastocyte. Yeah. Yes. At that point, the embryo is called the what? The blastocyte. It is at this stage that the embryo is referred as the what? The blastocyte. It is at this stage that the embryo is referred as the what? As the blastocyte. Now you have to understand that that endometrial fluid that was secreted by the what? Endometrium of the uterine tube are rich in nutrients. Yeah, it is rich in what? Nutrients, which also provide nutrients for the embryo. And you have to understand that that fluid can be called what? Uterine milk. Endometrial fluid can be called uterine milk. Endometrial fluid can be called uterine milk. It can be called what? Uterine milk. So that is how it does what? It works. You get. Now, still understand that the outer cell mass is the what? The trophoblast. These are the trophoblast. Now, these are the embryoblast, which is the inner cell mass. Embryoblast. Now, as the cavity enlarges, this cavity called the blastocell, as this cavity enlarges, right, the outer cell mass become flattened. Recall that the outer cell mass is the what? The trophoblast. As the cavity enlarges, the outer cell mass become what? Become flattened. You get? It becomes flattened. Why the inner cell mass, which is the embryoblast, become compacted and attaches itself to the what? To the trophoblast, which is the outer cell mass, and arrange themselves in one pool called the embryonic pool. As you can see here, the blastocell, which is this cavity, is smaller in this place compared to here. So it is the enlargement of the blastocell, which is the cavity of the blastocyte, that led to the what? To the flattenness of the outer cell mass, which is the trophoblast, and the compaction of the what? Of the inner cell mass, which is the embryoblast, thereby leading to the attachment of the inner cell mass in one pole called the embryonic pole. Here is one pole called the what? The embryonic pole. It is not a cavity. There is a pole here because they are attached in one pole. It is called what? Embryonic pole. It is called what? The embryonic pole. You get. Now, recall that this remains our what? Our trophoblast. This remains our embryoblast. This remains our embryoblast. Now, this cavity is called the cavity of blastocyte, which is the blastocell. Which is called the blastocell. I've told you guys what led to the what? The flattenness of the trophoblast and the compaction of the embryoblast. It is the enlargement of the what? Of the cavity of blastocyte or the blastocell that led to that. Now, after the cavity has enlarged, what will happen next? Get. Recall that already the zona pellucida has been disappeared. You get, because it have guided the embryo to the stage of getting ready for implantation. Because once the embryo has getting ready for implantation, it will disappear. You get, because the trophoblast has a strong tendency to stick with the endothelium. You get, it has a strong tendency to stick with the endothelium. Had it been the zona pellucida that disappears early, the trophoblast would have stick with the what endothelium, leading to ectopic pregnancy. You get, now watch, once the cavity has enlarged, what will happen next is that the zona pellucida has already been disappeared, because already the embryo is already ready for implantation. You get, now the embryoblast will form the embryo. You get, while the trophoblast, which is the outer cell mass, will provide what nutrition for the embryo. What the whole gist, recall that this is the blastocyte. Yeah, this is the blastocyte. This is the blastocyte. Now, there are two cells that form the blastocyte, which is the embryoblast and the what trophoblast. The embryoblast will form the embryo. While the trophoblast will provide nutrition for the embryo. Yeah, that is how everything happens. You get, still recall that there is a cavity here called the blastocyte. I mean, the cavity of the blastocyte, which is called the blastocell, that was created by the penetration of the endometrial fluid. You get, to the intercellular space of the morula. You get, because as the fluid become too much on the intercellular space of the morula, it becomes what confluent and enlarges, thereby forming a single large cavity called the blastocell, or the cavity of the blastocyte. So that is how it works. Now, what are the importance of zona pellucida? But before I dive into that, recall that once the blastocyte has been formed, you get, what will happen next is implantation. The embryo will be implanted at the what uterine cavity. You get, because the journey, which is the cleavage, the morula, and the blastocyte, you get, occurs in a range as the fertilized oocyte journeys from the ampullary region of the what uterine tube to the uterine cavity. That is how it occurs. Once the fertilization occurs in the ampulla, what will happen? Next embryonic event that will happen is what? Cleavage. From cleavage to morula. From morula to what? Blastocyte formation or blastogenesis. The next embryonic event that will happen next after the formation of the blastocyte is what? Is implantation. You get. So now this embryo is now ready for implantation. The sole aim is to form what? Blastocyte, which has the embryoblast and the what? The trophoblast. Now, what are the function of the zona pellucida? You have to understand that the trophoblast, which is the outer cell mass, has a strong tendency to stick with the endothelium. Okay? Now, the function of the zona pellucida is to prevent the sticking of the trophoblast to the endothelium of the uterine tube. You get, because if it should stick, it might lead to ectopic pregnancy. You get, so the cardinal function of the zona pellucida is to prevent implantation to occur in an unwanted site. You get, and if it occurs in an unwanted site, which is implantation, that is automatical ectopic pregnancy, because anywhere the embryo implant, yeah, pregnancy will take place in that place. The actual place for implantation to occur is at the uterine cavity. You get, that is why the zona pellucida has to guide the fertilized oocyte, which is the early embryo from its journey at the ampullary region of the what uterine tube to the uterine cavity where implantation will take place. It must guide it. It is when the fertilized oocyte, which is the embryo, is getting ready for implantation, it will disappear because it will not implant with the what, with the embryo. It has to disappear. So that is how it does what it works. That is the function of the Zona pellucida. It prevents what, ectopic pregnancy by guiding the trophoblast so it will not stick with the what, endothelium. So I believe we have done justice with the embryology of the cleavage and blastocyte formation. You get, from the introduction, we talked about the cleavage, the morula, and the blastocyte. I believe you enjoyed the class. Yeah. Thank you so much for staying to the end of this class. I really appreciate it.